War One. MC, it's a brand new year. How about you help us get started?
It is a brand new year, and everyone says great, great new year. All right. Unfortunately, it's a year of war. Okay. Starts off with General Dobin's forces take Yandi, right, in the Cameroon, which is just a small force. The king of Serbia arrives in Sri Lanka. So what's that mean? It means Serbia is out of the war. Serbia is surrendering. Sri Lanka, they're basically pulling all the way out of Serbian territory and into Albania. The first attempt to relieve Kut begins. All right. If you remember, Kut's now been surrounded. All right. So they attempt to relieve it because they were, Townsend was saying that we need supplies. We need supplies. All right. Or we're going to be wiped out. And this attempt, of course, like all the other attempts, fails because it's a bad failure. It's a huge failure because it leaves these are forces that could have been used as they slowly built up to an overwhelming force against the Turks, but in this case now they're outnumbered, and so they attempt to relieve it. It's not even coordinated with Townsend to try and do a breakout because Townsend doesn't want to do a breakout. He doesn't want to try to break out, so he's just sitting in place with his men. All right, instead of trying to break out. So of course this is beaten back. All right, and then we have the sinking of the King Edward VII. All right, now I'm sorry. Let's go back to this for a second. This is the Kut. What happens with Kut? All right, but what I wanted to show you is this is the HMS King Edward VII. Now you'll notice this is a pre-dreadnought. All right, this is before the dreadnought. You can see how its design is so old looking. It's like somewhere between an old sailing ship.
Well,
Okay,
no, and a vessel like that, don't you have to just target the smokestacks for the because it's steam powered, right? So you just want to blow the boiler.
Well, all these ships were steam powered. I mean, technically, but they're coal. They're coal fired is what they are. Go ahead, Party.
it's side armor that you want to overmatch. This is a little bit before plunging fire and stuff like that. So generally the size of the ship were the most armored because the decks didn't really have to be. But there's a couple of traits in this ship you can use to tell. If you have a look at the bow, for example, it strakes backwards. Now this is actually a design that they're looking to put on new US Navy destroyers because they found that it's a little bit more economical. But this is what you call a ramming bow. And it's exactly what it sounds like. If all else fails, you can ram this into another ship, and there's a dirty, great big spike just underneath the water, and that's partially that's design. Now the turrets. Mm. Now the turrets, right? You'll see that there is a dirty great big one at the front, just under the smokestacks. There's another one, but that fella's now sitting on the side of the ship. And what you can't do now with these things is superfire all of your turrets because you're losing a couple of guns on the other side of the ship because there's another turret mirrored on the other side. But those turrets can't fire to the opposite side of the ship, if you can follow what I mean. This design is also denotes pre-dreadnought because it's when the dreadnoughts start coming along is when they start putting all the turrets down the center line of the ship, so they can swing both ways. And I don't know whether you can see it, but secondaries in casemates. They're basically where you have the Iowa class battleship where their secondaries are in their own independent turrets. Pre-dreadnought battleships used to have their secondaries in what's known as casemates, and that's basically they're still sort of embedded in the side of a ship, just like the old tall ships, but they now can traverse a certain amount.
Well, you know what's really interesting that I didn't know until I was watching a documentary the other night. The Atlantic flagship for the United States Navy was the Constellation all the way through World War II, which was a wooden sailing vessel. Why would you have that as your flagship in the day of Ironsides and stuff? I mean, really.
Because that's for all intents and purposes, that's a presidential yacht.
Hmm.
That's why.
Yeah, it's flagship in spirit, pretty much.
The other thing I've noticed on this, and I think it's very interesting, notice this row of holes. These are portholes. You know, the round portholes all along this side of all along the ship in the bow. You would never see this. You do not see this on any modern ship today of the line.
Well, not only is the porthole itself very weak, but you've got a few feet around the porthole is also going to be very weak.
Yeah, you look at portholes here. I mean, it's a different. Obviously it's a This is what they're saying is a pre-dreadnought ship or pre-dreadnought battleship. Now it's a fairly substantial ship. You can see the size of some of the men, standing on there, and these guns are not insignificant, but they're nowhere near the size that you're dealing with from the dreadnought ships on the modern ships. Now, what I found interesting was, okay, this ship was still in the Navy. It was still in service. All right, but it was being basically used for, just home protection, more or less. Now, this ship hit a mine because the Germans were trying to mine all these different areas, right? Now, this ship hit a mine, and the mine it hit was here. It was off of Cape Wrath. Now, take a look where Cape Wrath is. All right, it's clear over here. It's on this part of the British Isles. It's closer to this side. Okay, this here, right here, by the way, is where Scapa Flow is. This is where the British fleet, all right, is hanging out. And yet they got sunk by a mine here. And what's been happening here is that the Germans are sending mine layers all around here during bad weather when they can't be seen, and laying a string of mines, all right, in an attempt to try and prevent, all right, the British from sailing out of Scapa Flow or hitting some of their major ships. And now these mines are basically floating mines. They just put them out there and they let them float. But you can see they're actually completely on the other side. If they had oil ships that ran on oil, right, they would have the distance to actually sail all the way around, and they could have gotten into the ocean. All right. The problem, of course, is when you deal with coal ships, is they need to be coal. You've got to restoke the coal. You only have a limited amount of distance you can sail. All right, when it comes to coal.
At risk of sounding like the idiot, during this time frame, did they have steam? Did they have piston engines or did they have turbines?
No, they're steam turbines.
No, that actually does depend on who you ask, because this is just after the turbine came in, and this is partially the reason why Germany thought that they could take on the British, was because when the British switched to turbines, all you needed to do was just keep building battleships and match the British and what they were trying to do, because the rest of their fleet was basically obsolete at this point in time, which is another thing that that this pre-dreadnought battleship that we were just the King George VII, that was also pre-dreadnought, meaning it was pre-turbine, meaning that it probably only had a top speed of about 19 knots. And the difference between that and the turbine is that that's where you start getting speeds up to 29 to 30, even in some cases 35 knots in gigantic battleships and stuff like that. So yeah, it did depend on who you were. Like the Italians didn't really have that many turbines at that point in time. The French probably had a couple, but the large majority of most of the fleets at this point in time, including this ship, were still steam piston.
Okay. No, that's good. That's a good explanation, because I forgot. Yeah, that they were coming in at this point, but these are steam powered ships. Obviously they have boilers. Obviously they're not going to turbines. I doubt this one is being a pre-dreadnought. I doubt it had a turbine on it.
No, that's still piston, a steam piston.
So,
yeah.
All right. And then we end up with the action in Mesopotamia. This is kind of like in the Russians basically fighting along their front, all right, against the Turks. But it's really not much of an action once again. Then you end up with the evacuation finally of Gallipoli. They're finally pulling out of Gallipoli now. The action of Sheikh Syed ends, which is, if I'm not mistaken, it was another one of the battles for Kut that was taking place around Kut.
Yeah. Sad story, that.
Yeah.
Sad story.
Generals, we'll talk about that when the British surrender, right? General Sir Charles Monroe vacates the command of the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force, and Sir William Birdwood vacates command of the Dardanelles Army, right? Well, that's pretty simple, seeing as the Dardanelles Army has been evacuated, right?
It's also been disbanded at this point too.
Right. Sir William Birdwood later temporarily commanded the 4th Army in France, and then the Australian Corps until eventually appointed to the 5th Army on May 23rd in 2018.
Yeah, I mentioned this before. With Birdwood. I think it was the last episode that we did, to remember his name, because this is where we start to get Australian officers, or he's Australian born, but he's a British officer, but we start getting Australians in the high command, and this is where the tactics and stuff start to turn, and they start utilising us properly. So this is where he gets appointed to Chief in India, temporary commander. Yeah, Birdwood later temporary commander of the 4th Army in France, and then the Australian Corps.
All right. The Entente governments informed the Greek government of proposed transport of the Serbian army to Corfu. All right, Corfu is an island. It's actually a Greek island. The Mount Lofshan, Montenegro, is taken by Australian forces. This forces, as you can see, the next day, in a couple days, an armistice that's signed between Montenegro and Austria. General Sir A.J. Murray takes over command of the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force. Now, what this does do is this places Townsend is no longer in charge of the entire Mediterranean force. Now it's Murray, right? But he's not going to be able to successfully, all right, get through to Kut to relieve Kut. Corfu is then seized by the French forces, and the Russian offensive toward Erzurum begins. Now, this is where they're talking about. All right, notice this is in Turkey. They have pushed all the way down through here and are taking forces through here. They're taking forces. Remember, they were at Tebris before. All right, the Russians are making some great headway against the Turks. Now, one of the reasons they're able to make this kind of headway is, as much as we talk about how bad the defeats were here on the Gallipoli Peninsula, it did tie down a number of Turkish forces to prevent them from being utilized against against the Russians.
Also, too, another thing that played in the Russians' hand there is around in that area that Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and all those kinds of stuff, you're starting to get into your stands and your really desolate parts of the world, like Mongolia and all that kind of stuff. There's not really that much out there to defend or anything like that.
This is what you're looking at.
Yeah. So
you can see this is kind of
there.
This is a pretty desolate kind of. Well, this is really bad ground. Okay. Because it's dry, right, and it's in a sense it's like it's like here in Tucson, it's a high desert kind of area, right? Yeah, there's a little bit of ground cover, but not really a lot. There's not a lot of water here. During the summertime, it is hot as hell. Now they're fighting in the winter at the moment. If you noticed, this is January time frame, which is why they're launching these attacks. Okay, but the thing about deserts in the winter is they're cold as hell. Okay, at night. At night, there is a 40-degree temperature swing. So if something's in the 50s, that's all well and good. All right. But when you have a 40-degree temperature swing, it can be down in the teens at night. So during the day, it's 50 degrees outside, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, it's below freezing. All right.
So you
Go.
basically go from a comfortable day's march to lethally cold at night.
Yes, bitter cold at night.
Hyperthermia to hypothermia.
Yep. You'll be walking in 69 degree weather where you're carrying a pack and you're sweating like a pig, and then the nighttime comes and you freaking freeze your balls off. You wake up and go, ooh, on your tent there's sparklies, and I hate sparklies from the hoarfrost from coming from your mouth.
Fucking yeah, but anyway, yeah, in that area there, there's strategically there's fuck all there, and area like that, basically it's an army waster, because you're basically spreading troops out over a great deal of desolate area just to fight over fucking literally dirt, and yeah, if you don't necessarily sort of cover those kinds of areas, you do leave major huge gaps that you know other armies can just sort of walk right through. And whilst the Turks were being having their attention taken over in the Dardanelles, what the actual terrain itself didn't lend itself to very great defence either way. Yeah.
So going a little further, you have the armistice between Montenegro and Austria. All right. The Senjija is occupied by the Austrian forces. So this is a win now. The Turks, or not the Turks, but the Serbs, that for all intents and purposes, have been defeated. Okay. Kirkemish in the western Persia was occupied by Turkish forces, but that gets reversed very soon. The Greek government refuses consent on the occupation of Corfu. The Greek government threatens basically what we call the Allies, the Entente. All right, saying, look, Corfu, you guys cannot keep Corfu. All right, you guys have got to release this. All right, or else you risk us joining the side of the Central Powers. And there was some very good reasons for joining the Central Powers. You got to remember. Let me go back to the map part. All right, we're talking this area here, right? Now you're talking Montenegro's already been taken over. All right. This area here in northern Macedonia, Kosovo has been taken over by Bulgaria. Bulgaria is in a great position to threaten all this area, right? Bosnia-Herzegovina is gone. Montenegro is gone, all right? The Central Powers have successfully ringed this area, and they're fighting here. Sri Lanka is in this area. And let me see if I can find this. This is Corfu, right? This is where they want to evacuate the army to. The Serbian army. They wanted to evacuate it to this island down here, right? Technically, this is a Greek isle. Okay, so the fact that the Greeks were saying, we'll join the Central Powers, this is dangerous, all right? Especially when you consider one of the other powers that's fighting is Italy. Can you imagine, all right, having Italy more or less surrounded by the Central Powers now? And how are you going to supply them? How are you going to, help these guys out? Because all along this area here, people don't forget, there's no movement along these areas because this is the Alps. Moving supplies and stuff through this area is not necessarily very easy to do. You can't go through Switzerland. So everything would have to come through here. Right? And for all intents and purposes, Italy would be surrounded.
Well, and Germany's got has got a lot of industry. They're very good when it comes to mechanical things, so you've also got that factor.
Well, and then of course the Turks. I mean, the Turks would be allied with the Greeks. Now that's one of the reasons why the Allies never believed that the Greeks would ever ally with the Turks, right? Because of the animosity between these two nations. But it's important to remember all this, just how close this was, because the Greeks were highly upset about the French going in here and taking over this island and basically just seized it. Okay, action in the Wadi, all right, which is once again is in Mesopotamian area. The king of Serbia leaves Sri Lanka. Basically, they're being forced all the way out. General Sario assumes command of the Allied forces in Sri Lanka. All right, it doesn't make any difference. All right. Armenia again captured by Russian forces. The king of Serbia arrives at Oedipus. Now, he is actually now arrived inside of Greece. And I kind of skipped something that I wanted to go over. All right, and there's a couple things here. First of all, the British SS Appin was captured by a German raider, Moe. All right. And you're going to see this come up later. It's able to capture this, but it can't get it. It can't get it back to British waters because it's in the Atlantic. They seized this ship in the Atlantic. So what you're going to see is they're going to float this ship. They're going to take the ship as a prize, and they're going to take it to the United States. and they're going to claim it as a prize ship in the United States. Then we have the von Papen papers published. All right, and this gets the removal of von Papen. This is von Papen in his earlier incarnation. Now, von Papen is the, we'll say, military attaché, right, from the Germans, all right, to the United States. He is working out of Washington, D.C. Now, remember, at this point in time in the war, technically, the United States is neutral, all right? Well, von Papen, for lack of a better term, is a master spy. All right? He is doing everything he can to bolster the German war effort. Initially, he's trying to get the United States to sell them arms. But when it becomes obvious that, yeah, we'll sell you the arms, how do we get them there? There's no way to get them to the German forces, all right, through the British blockade. When he fails at, when that fails, that plan basically fails. He shifts, and he's got a lot of money. The Germans are willing to let him spend a lot of cash, and he spends it. And one of the things that the British were having a problem with, of course, was as these battles start to ramp up, where even more and more men are fed into this meat grinder, the British are having a problem keeping up with the logistics, the artillery shells, for example. So they're relying more and more upon the United States for arms. Well, von Papen, of course, knows this. And what he does is he watches and he finds out where the British government makes a deal, all right, to buy artillery from an American company. And he finds out which American companies those are and what regions they're in. And he goes out and he buys all the hydraulic presses necessary to produce shells in that area to prevent the shells from being built.
Sneaky bastard.
Okay, he is running, for lack of a better term, a terror campaign in Canada where they're blowing up bridges. Okay, he is sending arms, right? He's purchasing American arms. And instead of course, if he can't get them to Great Britain, he can't get them to Germany, rather. Well, where can he get them? Well, who's an enemy of Great Britain? Well, Ireland. So she's shipping arms to Ireland, all right, to the rebels in Ireland, all right. He is then also on the West Coast. He flies to the West Coast and meets a number of spies, right, and starts sending arms to rebels over in the the subcontinent of India.
So this guy is far from trying to be the gentleman in war. He's okay, how can I stab you in the back when you're not looking at me?
And of course, the United States, us being what we are, we're like, okay, we're neutral, right? So we're not watching people like this. That we're not watching people closely. The British, of course, don't take kindly to this. They know about all this, and what they do is they capture some of his papers and they hand it over to prove what he's been doing. And as a result, the United States says, okay, you're you're not living up to your diplomatic credentials. You are supposed to be here as a diplomat. Instead, you're here as a spy and a terrorist. All right, we're kicking you out. Now, they couldn't arrest him for anything because he has diplomatic immunity, but they could send him back, and that's what they do. But it's a great, I mean, if you read about the operations he was running, it's impressive.
Well, no, I get the whole funding terrorists and in Ireland thing, but blowing up bridges in Canada, they were at war with the British, and Canada was a British protectorate. Canada was sending troops. That's fair game.
Okay, you think it's fair game if they're coming from the United States and running across the border, blowing up a bridge in Canada and running back to the United States?
Underground Railroad, ring a bell?
Underground Railroad is not the
I know, it was a joke. But I'm just saying, that's a little bit more borderline than funding fucking terrorists in Ireland. That's a little out there, but the Canada thing, I don't know.
I mean, I understand your point, all right, but the fact is he was using saboteurs from the United States to go across the border and basically hitting Canada that way from a neutral country.
Were they American nationals or were they German nationals?
Doesn't matter, does it?
Yes and no. I mean, kind of.
Could this have brought conflict between the United States and Great Britain if we allow Germans on our soil to run across the border, attack their enemy in Canada, and then run back for safety back in the United States?
Absolutely, because we'd be an accomplice in war, but still trying to call ourselves neutral. What day are you on in February?
We're in January. We're not in February yet.
Oh, okay.
We're getting ready for January 17th.
Oh, okay. I was wondering because I saw what you were looking at, and I had found the same thing. I think it's the same thing last night.
Oh, well, what did you find?
greatwar.co.uk/timeline.
Yes, that's what we're running.
Okay, cool.
We're in 1916. I put it in the in Discord for you if you want to follow along. I'm sorry, we're at the 18th. So yeah, Baron Bainens succeeds Davington as the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs. Now, Belgium, for all intents and purposes, has been occupied. So you're talking about the government in exile. Lieutenant General Sir Percy Lake takes over command of the British forces in Mesopotamia from General Nixon. Negotiations between Austria and Montenegro break off, and the war begins again. British attack Hannah. Okay, the end of the first attempt for Kut. That basically ends over. Antivari is occupied by Austrian forces. The Romanian government opens negotiation with the Russian government, all right, with the view of military assistance. So, go back to here. Let's take a look. What you have now is you have the Russians, which basically are in control of this entire area here, now trying to convince the Romanians, all right, to join them. And this is to create a counterbalance against the Bulgarians, because the Bulgarians joining the Central Powers, all right, and taking out Serbia was a large blow. All right, the fact is that Serbia probably could have may have been able to hold on the entire time if it wasn't for the fact that the Bulgarians, all right, sided with the Central Powers and attacked. All right. Albania, Skutri in Albania is occupied by the Austrian forces. Porgats in Montenegro is occupied by Austrian forces. The first military service bill passed by the British House of Commons. Now, what's the first military service bill? Is this a draft?
It sounds like it.
I was gonna say that's what it sounds like to me.
Farty, is this a draft?
Hang on, what was that? Sorry.
The first military service bill, is that a draft?
Oh yeah, it's conscription.
So the British now are forced to start conscription.
Yeah. Oh, this was something that they've been thinking about for a little while. They've been thinking about bringing it in. They've just officially done it.
Okay. San Genovino di Mida is captured by Austrian forces. The United States government makes a formal protest to the British government regarding the blacklist policy. So what's the blacklist policy?
Okay, this is something we were talking about last time, where it was basically you've got to buy from or deal with Great Britain, or else you're not dealing with anybody. This is with the shipping licenses, and I think it was the Dutch that they were trying to get the textiles industry to just basically trade with England. So this is what that blacklisting thing is. If you don't trade with us, then we will blacklist you, and you will not be allowed to trade with Germany, which means it will sink your exports or your imports or whatever. And
So basically, they were telling the company that you either deal with us, and if you want to deal with somebody else, you ask us first who you want to deal with, and then we'll either approve it or we won't.
It's not so much any leeway as that. It's all right. You're either dealing with Britain or you're just going to be losing your stuff. It's as simple as that. Your ships better be coming to
Makes
Great
sense.
Britain, or else they're going straight to the bottom. It's as simple as that. That's what blacklisting means. You're not allowed to trade with anybody but. That's the same with Hollywood blacklisting. It's the same thing there. If you don't do what this producer says, you'll never work in this town again. Yeah, you don't trade with the British, you will never sell shit to anybody ever again. That's what it means.
Oh no! I understand. It's just I find it amusing that they would do this. Now, of course, the United States would say no. We're not going to listen to that. But for all intents and purposes, how much was this really going to be enforced? Because how much was the United States really going to try and trade with somebody else?
Well, that's
In the
a bit of a
Atlantic.
thing. That's a bit of a thing there too, where it does come up to this hypothetical or what would have happened. And in most realities, the Americans would have traded with the British or the French over the Germans, anyways. The Yanks didn't really have the fleet to take on the British, especially in their home waters at the time. So yeah, the British could effectively still make this blockade work. Yeah, it's just up in the air whether the Yanks would have tried to side with the Germans. History dictates that they came on our side anyway.
The U.S. fleet was actually capable of defending itself in its home waters. Now, could it defend itself against the entire British fleet? No, but if the entire British fleet sailed, then so did the High Seas fleet for the Germans. So,
Oh, well, that's the thing. Yeah, the British fleet didn't have to go anywhere because all the stuff had to come past Britain to go to Germany. So,
right. Now, in that case, it would have been a different thing. We would have had to have already decided to go. Okay, we're going to go to war, and we're going to side with the Germans. All right,
Yeah.
And then even then, if we're doing something like that, you're sending your ship, you're sending U.S. ships off pretty good long ways without any real idea of whether or not you're going to be able to bring them back.
well, here's a couple of other little instances that you needed to take into consideration with first, is that America didn't keep up with the rest of the world with the whole turbine battleship thing. And they had very, very few oil-powered battleships.
Oh, no, we had, I think we didn't have any at that time.
No, you had a couple. But then the reason why I know
But
this
they were in the Pacific because of the distance that's gained. They weren't in the Atlantic.
partially that, but they never went to Europe because there's no oil refineries or anything. Everything runs off of coal. So they couldn't fuel them there to begin with. So the rest of your fleet's old coal burning piston engine stuff. So the British will be able to outturn and outmaneuver you, no problems whatsoever. Another great big lacking that the Americans had back in the beginning of World War I is that, sure, off the coast of America in nice calm seas, yeah, they could fire all their guns and make it look really good and all this kind of stuff. But on pitching surfaces like in the North Sea or something like that, they had absolutely no experience in gunnery in seas like that. So, but the British did. So they would have had that massive advantage there right off the bat to begin with. So the speed, maneuverability,
if the United States had ever tried a sortie against the British fleet in the North Sea, it couldn't have done it alone. But it wouldn't have had to necessarily either if it coordinated with the Germans. Now that would have been a different dynamic. But for all intents and purposes, it would never have come to that. So. Because we never gotten to the point where we could sail that way. But it would have put a lot of pressure on Great Britain the biggest pressure that would have been put on Great Britain is there are no supplies coming from the United States.
Well, that's another thing there too. But that also works the same with America as well, because while you guys could send your coal-burning ships over to the North Sea and around Europe and all that kind of stuff, they couldn't really sit there for very long.
No, we couldn't sit there at all. No, you're exactly right. But like I said, we couldn't project power, but at the same time, if the United States ever did side with Germany, the biggest advantage would be cutting off the supplies to the British Isles.
Yeah, then it would be interesting because then it'd be down to the colonies to supply Britain. Interesting to see what would have happened then.
Well, if that had happened, that would have been Operation Red, and we would have probably been invading at some point, attempting to invade Canada, which would have created where are you going to get the colonies to supply you? You'd have to rely upon your eastern colonies, not the western ones.
Yeah,
well,
Asia, Australia, and India.
Then you have the worry of trying to get stuff from halfway across the world to you, because the United States, I believe at that point, could have basically blockaded Canada because we had the home field advantage. They're right there. But then you have to look at, okay, where else are you going to get your coal? South Africa, New Zealand, Australia. That's on the other. Most of that's on the other side of the planet.
Well, coal the British had. Steel is what they would have had. Iron ore they were not in a large supply of.
Well, you see, that's where it gets interesting there, because we've got all the iron ore that you'd ever need. The problem is it's here.
Well, yeah, it's not on the British Isles themselves, no.
Yeah, but in having said that, the Brits have got all the industrial shit. They've got all the factories and the smelters and the mungers and the ironworks and all this shit. We've got all the steel. They've got all the stuff to make it into shit.
And they have tons of coal, so they definitely can utilize it.
Oh, we got our own coal too, so yeah.
All right.
We got some uranium if you want some.
The United States has plenty of uranium, even if it is owned by the Russians. But that's another story. All right. Great Britain, the Military Service Act is passed by Parliament, imposing conscription on all single men aged 18 to 41 in Great Britain. Exemptions were made for men who were in essential war work, those declared mentally unfit, religious ministers, and conscientious objectors. The period of conscription was in force until 1919.
Now, with conscription, basically what happened was that they'd set the age parameters, which was 18 to 41, and then they'll call out, say, everybody born on such and such birth date, you've got to go sign up. That's how a draft conscription usually works. Some stupid reasons, like they only do birth dates instead of just calling up big groups of your age group, you go, so they don't wipe out entire age groups. What was I going to say there? Never mind.
Why so old?
What do you mean, why so old?
Well, why would you say people up to the age of 41 instead of saying people younger than that? Because especially I think a little more so back then, but even today, there's not a 41-year-old is not going to make that great of an infantryman.
No, not really. But what they do also bring is a world's worth of experience and all this, and a body that's generally assumed to still be able to take enough punishment. It's great to have a full army of 18-year-olds that don't know shit about shit. It's even better if you have a couple of blokes that have been in the last one, like some Boer War guys. That's what I was going to say. Right, now, with
Ah.
conscription as well, it's not just a blanket thing. So just because your birth date corresponds with the birth date that they've called up doesn't necessarily mean you go up. By essential services and stuff like that, they're talking about like doctors, politicians, people who do a job that can't necessarily be just taken over by somebody else. Like if someone is a fitter and turner, they turn a screw. Yes, any old person can do that, but not everyone can, perform brain surgery or something like that. So
Well,
people,
and specific industries. If you were working inside of a specific industry, you were left alone. If you were a farmer, however,
if you were making the guns,
Exactly.
that's essential. Like the guy who makes the guns is more essential than the guy who pulls the trigger. So
I know this is sorry.
Yeah.
I was about to make I know this is a Second World War analogy, but we had the same issue here in the States at the beginning of the Second World War. A lot of people, like Boeing, wanted to immediately enlist, but they had to be told by the War Department, no, you're not allowed to. We need people to build airplanes.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other term that they use there is called conscientious objector. Now, for those who don't know what a conscientious objector is, that's a hippie. It's a draft dodger.
I was going to use a different word.
Yeah, it's a draft dodger, effectively.
I was going to use a different word that often used. This word is often used in place of particular, female genitalia.
Cunt. What, are they copper nitrotetrazoles, are they?
Okay, but
Hey, someone got the joke.
When it comes to the British Isles themselves, I mean, I get it. There's a dense population base, but if they had to go man to man with Germany, Germany will still have people left at the end. You know what I mean?
Well, if it's just France, I mean, if it's just rather England, yeah. But if it's France as well, no.
It was the colonies, then no.
Yes, that's true. India had plenty of people.
Now, the thing that this is another issue that's born of World War One, and that is the whole thing of conscientious objectors. And I think I actually have made mention of this before with the suffragette movement, and this was all because of the rise of media and all this, and how people were getting actual feedback from the battlefields and whatnot. And some people did say, "Hang on a minute, I'm too much of a pussy to do that, so no."
Well, and of course, the life in the trenches was just horrible. Okay, I mean, let's be honest. All right, let's get on to this. On 29th January, the last German airship raid on Paris, because the airships are basically just getting shot down.
Yep.
And also, they're now using barrage balloons and so forth, which makes the use of the airship, in these things kind of difficult. On the 31st, you end up with the last airship raid on Britain, the furthest penetration westward. Casualties 183.
I do not remember. Is this after the introduction of the incendiary round?
Probably.
I'd say so. Yeah.
Okay, well,
I'd say so.
Well, for those listening, before then, let's say you're flying a scout plane, you don't target just the general structure, which we're really going after. Then the hydrogen bags. You're going after the engines and the gondolas, the stuff bolted to the side. But with incendiary rounds, now you can set fire to the thing.
And fire
really
and hydrogen fire and hydrogen is really bad.
Well, the incendiary round really is what killed the airship, and it's very, very hard to get together a bunch of hydrogen, and it leaks. Yeah,
well, flaming things with hydrogen tends to cause big fires, big fires, bad fires. All right, on February 1st, the British Appin brought to Norfolk by the German prize crew from the Moe, and of course, the United States seizes this. All right, because they don't recognize this. Gromykin, the Russian premier, resigns. All right, Mr. Sturmer is appointed his successor. Ebesen is taken by the Bulgarian forces. The German L ship L-19 founders in the North Sea. Now, this is one of the things that the Germans did have an advantage of, is they would send these airships out, all right, and they could patrol the North Sea. They could basically give warning of what all the British ships were. This made it very difficult for the British to operate, actually, with impunity in the North Sea. Yeah, they had the firepower to an extent, but when the enemy knows what you're doing, that becomes quite a bit dangerous. All right, when the enemy has eyes on you and you don't know where the enemy is.
Well, also the German airships are much more rigid. So if the British ones got into weather that they just couldn't handle, the Germans were looking at them like, ha 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 ha, we're still good to go.
Well, obviously they may have been more rigid, but they definitely weren't without problems with founders in the North Sea. Now, the thing is that this took an airship. All right, these airships with the hydrogen and everything, they're expensive. They're expensive to operate. They're expensive to build. There's a lot of technical expertise that's necessary for this, and you're in the middle of a major war. Are we really utilizing these things effectively becomes the question. All right, the Serbian government sets up in Corfu. Basically, in other words, this is the Serbian government in exile. The German gunboat Visum sunk by HMS Mimi and Fifi, all right, in Lake Tanganyika.
This is that little African conflict I made mention of, where there was a British force one side in one country, there's a German force on the other side in another country, and this place is split by this gigantic lake, and they basically just sail around and do nothing the entire war.
All right. Obviously, the draft comes into operation in Great Britain. All right. The Serbian army is concentrated in Corfu. Basically, now there is no Serbian army that's on the coast or on the continent that can fight against the Central Powers. And then the Germans send a note to the United States stating that defensively armed merchantmen will be treated as belligerents and they will be sunk by torpedoes.
And this is about the point where the Germans the Americans go, oh, so that's why Britain did that blacklisting thing. Great Britain, yes, that trade thing, yes, you were talking about. Yeah, I think we'll go with you.
Another dreadnought battleship, the Arethusa, all right, is sunk by a mine in the North Sea.
Arethusa.
Arethusa, thank you. All right. An Italian detachment reaches Corfu. Whoopee. All right. The Russian attack on Urgum begins. Urgum, that's up here. Once again. So they've marched now, and that's the other thing is there's not really any railroads here. You're marching to try and take this area. All right.
Oh, you poor bastards.
And you're walking through this area. Once again, this is what this area looks like. You can tell this is not something to be enjoying. You're not enjoying the pleasant hike through the forests. You know, there's not a lot of picnicking going on in here. The Antan governments notified Greece of the forthcoming transfer of the Montenegrin army to Corfu. What's left of the Montenegrin army is being kicked out. The Anton powers make a declaration guaranteeing Belgium eventual independence and indemnification. This part was bullshit. Okay, you fought a battle. You fought a war, you lost. The fact that they're allowing you back your freaking independence should have been enough. You should not have been receiving war reparations. The fifth battle of Inzio, all right, begins. Now, once again, for those who want to know, or really care, you're talking up in here. up in the winterlands, all right, where they're fighting along this border, and it is all you're doing is getting people killed, shot, and frozen. Think about this: you're fighting in the Alps in the beginning of February. Look at what you're fighting through. This is where you're fighting. This is the terrain you're fighting in. In February, you launch an offensive through here. Somebody's got to be questioning the Italians and what the hell they were thinking. All right,
I'm fucking tired. I'm fucking tired just looking at that map.
I mean, imagine being an infantryman trying to march through that.
I have imagined it. That's why I'm fucking tired.
I bet a lot of guys looked at it and said, no.
I mean, you're in this, and this is, and in the winter, in the dead of winter, you're fighting in this kind of in this terrain. I mean, it's insane. It's absolutely insane trying to fight through this stuff. I just don't understand. Now you can come back and go, well, they're fighting over here. Yeah, but that's a hell of a lot different than fighting in the Alps. All right?
I wonder how many men they lost to the cold.
Yeah, it's impossible to know. It is a good question.
And how many they lost from falling off?
Yeah, that's another good question. People just falling and dying. The agreement concludes between the British government and the chieftains, all right, for cooperation against for protection in the Persian oil fields. Basically, this is Britain going, hey, oil is going to be the thing of the future. Let's try and get some of this stuff. At this time, they're also trying to make deals in the Arabian Peninsula, by the way.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, Sheik, do you want your own little country? Yeah, we'll call it Iraq.
The British order in council extends the powers of the ship leasing committee to all voyages. The licensing committee. Now, what does that mean?
That's still another part of the whole blacklisting thing. This is just the licensing side of it. So that if you don't want to be blacklisted, you get yourself a license and you run by these rules.
Okay. Erzurum is taken by the Russian forces. The remnants of the Montenegrin army makes it to Corfu. The War Office to take over anti-aircraft defense of London from the Admiralty. Now, why was the Admiralty in charge of the anti-aircraft defenses in London?
That's a very good question. I'd hazard to guess it'd be something similar to, like, they're considered better experts on artillery than what the army are, and they don't have an air force at the moment, so there's no service to branch out from there. So just with gunnery and all this kind of stuff, but I'm just making the assumption that because the Navy was renowned for their gunnery, that'd be the mob that they'd go and see. This is introducing a few things that we'll see in the future as well. This is also the beginning of the Royal Observer Corps, which is prelude to radar. These are the people.
Even when radar was becoming a tool mostly used during the Second World War, the Observer Corps was still crucial, because if you had a bunch of Blenheims flying back, you didn't want to misidentify them as HE-111s.
That's right.
Not only that, but I can't say this from the political standpoint for Britain, but from a cultural standpoint here in the U.S., until the late 30s, airplanes were referred to as ships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was a similar thing with tanks as well. The tanks were actually called land ships and governed by the Land Ship Committee, which was also governed by people from the Admiralty. Now, with the Royal Observer Corps, this also starts up with things like anti-aircraft artillery and things like that. But this is just the beginning of that kind of a thing: air defense and air surveillance and things like that.
Okay. Chios in the Aegean is occupied by British forces. I assume this is a small island. Berat in Albania. Basically, Albania is being carved up. The last of the German forces in South Cameroon crossed the border into Spanish territory for internment. So basically, they go into Spain because they're now in Spain. Spain is technically neutral. They say, okay, we surrender our arms and we are now surrendering to the Spanish rather than to the British forces. I'm not sure what advantage that gives them. Okay.
Gets them out of the war.
Mush is taken in Armenia is taken by the Russians. The last German post in the Cameroon surrenders. Major General Tai, all right, succeeds General Schmutz and command of the British forces in East Africa. All right, so now is General Tai the one who's coming up with the Lawrence of Arabia plan, I believe, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think he's of Lawrence of Arabia fame. We'll be talking about Lawrence of Arabia in upcoming episodes. Then we end up with this, the Battle of Verdun. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a major battle. Falkenhayn it begins as a German offensive. Okay, and Falkenhayn wants to basically reduce these forts. He knows something about the psyche of the French people, and he understands that they have a lot of pride and a lot of stiff pride, and Domont is very important to them, especially the fort at Domont. So what he's come up with, what he does is he proposes this plan to the the Kaiser and the general staff. And his idea is to take these forts, take this area around Verdun, all right, and seeing as it's such an important part of the French psyche, they will then be forced to fight here and try and take it back at all costs. And his plan is to turn this into a meat grinder. And this is the beginning of this battle. The Germans, for all intents and purposes, are successful initially, and they do take Fort Domont. All right. In fact, when they take Fort Domont, it actually is, for all intents and purposes, undefended at that point because of the German artillery. The German launched the artillery barrage, all right, with 10 million artillery shells. And now they're firing these artillery shells in one massive, constant barrage, and they're intermixing poison gas, okay, intermixed with these shells. Now, basically what they've done is they've thrown away the whole, convention against use of poison gas, whereas before they were using them as the spray canisters, all right. By convention, it was outlawed to place artillery shells, all right, use chemical shells, and they basically said, well, everyone's using poison gas, no one cares anymore, let's go ahead and use it. All right, so they've thrown away the convention now. They're not even giving lip service to it anymore. And they're successful, and they're able to basically take this entire most of this area away. Okay, all the way up through here. The French, of course, are forced to defend this then and try and take it back. And wave after wave after wave of men are fed into this brutal battle area. And there's one casualty list that I've seen that at the end of this battle, all right, where they assume or they estimate rather that there were 800,000, okay, 800,000 casualties on the French side and over 345,000 casualties on the German side. Now, this offensive by the Germans also did something else, and that is it threw a monkey wrench into the plans between the Germans between the French and the English. They had planned a spring offensive. This kicked off in February, all right, before the offensives that were being planned by the French and the British were ready to go. And it throws a monkey wrench into those plans because all of a sudden now, because of the initial success and the breakthrough, the French are forced to feed forces in here to stem the tide. And their big plan, all right, to aid in a mass assault in the Somme area, the Battle of the Somme, which is going to happen, all right, has to be placed on hold. All right. And then eventually from the French side, the all French support is given and fed into Verdun. And these people are going over in mass waves. They're getting machine gunned down. People are this is just death incarnate. Just horrifying. Just absolutely horrifying. All in this area here. It's sickening, the number of dead that arrive here. All right. Another German airship is brought down. The German government informs the United States government that defensively armed merchant ships will henceforth be regarded as cruisers, so they can be sunk without popping up. You know, the rules where the submarine's supposed to surface and inform people. Lieutenant General Sir H.C. Schluchter, the Adjutant General of the Home Forces, resigns. And Macready, the Adjutant General of the British Expeditionary Force in France, resigns. Lieutenant General Falk is appointed the Adjutant General of the British Expeditionary Force, and Macready is appointed the Adjutant General of the Home Forces. Now, can you explain that? Is this a promotion up, or is this just you can't do the job, so we'll keep you? We'll let you save face by making you in charge of the home forces in Britain.
I'd say so. Yeah, yeah. Keep you where we can see you, so you can't cause too much trouble.
Okay, Fort Dumont. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because some of the stuff is just immaterial at this point. Fort Dumont is stormed by the British forces, like it was, or maybe by the German forces rather, and it's taken on the 25th of February. Sensuis is defeated by British forces in action in western Egypt. Okay, what has happened now is the British basically control Egypt, but they're they're dealing with an uprising. All right, and they have to settle this uprising, all right, before they can really utilize these forces to go on the offensive against the Ottoman Turks. Okay, and of course the Ottoman Turks are trying to, encourage this kind of activity, along with the rest of the Central Powers. All right, and basically now the revolt is basically coming to an end. Durazzo is captured by the Austrian forces. The nucleus of the British Air Squadron formed to bomb German industrial centers begins. The Albanian provisional government of Assad Pasha is set up in Naples. So Albania now has a government in exile. Now, what were you going to say, Falcon?
I was going to say the British, their bombing raids, they were not as effective as people like to think they were. Simply because your targeting method was, okay, I think it'll hit now.
Yeah.
You didn't have one, basically.
Well, yeah,
You're flying at like 15,000 feet.
Yeah, I mean, you're throwing out, bombs, but you're not sure where they're going to land. But I mean, it was a way to annoy things.
Well, if it really did anything, it just scared the populace.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that can be effective, right? Action in the North Sea between the German raider Grief and the British auxiliary cruiser Alcantara. Is that what it is? Alcantara? All right, both are sunk, right? The German government says it. Alcantara, thank you. The British government sends a note to the United States stating that it is not intended to postpone to the extended submarine campaign, right? basically now they're saying, well, we've postponed. We have a submarine campaign against shipping, but we're trying to keep it within limits. Okay. Now they're saying, okay, not only the British Isles, right around the British Isles are fair game. They're extending it now to just ships they think are going toward Britain. So now they're going to take it out further. They're not going to. Basically, they're not saying around the islands, the small little area around the islands. Whereas before, and let's take the map. This is a great thing about Google, right? Before, they had like within 100 miles of the British Isles here, all right, things would be sunk. Well, if you're talking just the British Isles, remember Ireland, all right, is part of Britain at this point. Okay, so this is all included. However, what they're saying now is, out here in the Atlantic, it's all fair game. They're now declaring anything out here, and their submarines are, advanced enough that they can get into the Atlantic without any support, and then get back home. They can actually travel all the way through here on their own power.
Okay, well, what did they think was happening? The German fleet is bottlenecked in. It can't really break out, so it's not like anybody's swapping cargo out in the middle of the Atlantic, is there?
Well, no.
Well, then why are you attacking shipping that could be headed to fucking Greenland or Iceland or fucking wherever,
Well, it's not coming to us, so fuck it.
Exactly.
Yeah, never mind. Whatever.
And really, at this point of submarine technology,
it's a good question, and it's a good, and the response, unfortunately, is accurate, which is the Germans are saying, we know that they're getting supplies here. We're not going to ask where these ships are headed for. We're saying that our blockade of the British Isles begins way out here, all right, and isn't close in. That's what that's what they're basically saying. Now, is it going to Iceland? Yeah, it could be, but everybody knows what's in Iceland. What kind of shipping is really going to go to Iceland and back? Not
Trawlers, really. Fishing ships.
What's going to go to Greenland? Not really a whole lot. Okay, so if there's a big freaking merchant ship, where's it headed? It's not headed to Iceland. It's not headed to Greenland.
Well, guys, now Germany is finally using the submarine of that era to its actual effectiveness. Don't just sit on the surface, give a warning, and then use your deck gun. If you see them coming, you basically get yourself in their path, submerge periscope depth, and wait for them to get close enough and shoot a torpedo into one.
Yeah.
Unless they see your periscope, they don't know until they see that trail of bubbles heading towards them.
That's if someone's looking.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta, and you have to see it fairly quickly when you think about it. All right, because and even if you don't see it quickly, even if you see it before it hits, you may not have time to turn the ship out of the way.
Well,
even with a good watch, it's still a matter of maybe you'll see it in time, because at this point you've been out into the Atlantic for a couple weeks. Everyone is getting pretty drained.
Also, getting back onto what we're talking about with the dreadnoughts and whatnot, a lot of these tramp steamers are going to be your steam piston driven things. They've probably only got one screw. They've only got one rudder. That rudder it's not a tactical rudder. It's not going to move very fast. So even if you do see it, you can throw the wheel as fast as you want, and you can push the pedal down as hard as you want. That ship's still going to turn at the speed of continental drift.
So,
it's not a warship.
Mad Dodge, you were asking the question, why would they do? And this, of course, is, something that the United States, of course, is objecting to. because their ships are being sunk, even though they're technically neutral.
Well, yeah, that's exactly my point. And, you know, you want to aggravate the United States, fuck with our money.
Now, what's happening in the United States this time that people tend to forget is the fact that, well, there's an election this year. This is an election year, right? And Woodrow Wilson is running for re-election, and his campaign, as it goes forward, will be his big campaigning point will be he kept us out of war, and once he's elected, we go into war.
Oh,
Now,
the irony of history.
And there's a lot of people. You got to think about this. There's a lot of people in the United States that are actually on the German side. There's Great Britain at this point is not the ally that it is today. It just isn't, and it's not considered. It's considered a potential adversary. Always been considered more of a potential adversary. So that's January and February. So, anybody else got any comments they want to make about this?
Mm.
I'd say that we're done, Matt.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would say is it is the beginning of a very, very bloody year. And as we progress week by week, it might almost devolve into casualty reports at this point, right?
Well, when we start getting into like Verdun and like say the Somme and things like that in a bit more detail, yes, there will be casualties coming out because it's a very, very high or very prominent part of these battles is the amount of casualties.
Absolutely. 1916 was not the best year for the world.
Well,
Thank you, everybody. Oh, go ahead, MC.
No, Falcon.
No, I was just going to comment. The whole thing just starts to devolve into a meat grinder. But sorry for interrupting, Mad Dodge. You do your ending.
Yeah, no, everybody, thank you for coming out. Once again, hopefully we'll start getting a more regular schedule again. I did injure my hand, but it's getting better, so we'll see. For sure, we'll be back next week, hopefully, unless MC has to go terrorize a third world country. Who knows? He goes out of town sometimes. Good night, everybody.